Hello, everybody, and welcome to Zenatta Consulting's monthly webinar. This is not really our April webinar. We're just kind of slipping this one in by popular demand. This is Zoho CRM. We are going to cover workflows, beginner and advanced workflows. And I am Brett Martin.
And I'm Tyler Colt.
And let's just jump right into what we're going to be talking about here today. So for the agenda, we're going to cover basically what CRM workflows are, and then we're going to do the if and then conditions. So these are triggers and conditions. We're going to say, if this, then this. We're going to kind of run through it, take each and every possible thing you can do with one of these workflows. And then we're going to get a little advanced. Tyler's going to jump into some webhooks and some custom functions and how you can actually make these workflows kind of go to the next level. So with that, for those of you that don't know, what are Zoho CRM workflows? Basically, they comprise a set of actions that allow you to basically say, if this happens, then I would like you to do this. And this can be for anything. So it can be updating fields. It can be following up on leads, setting tasks, firing off emails. Basically, when a certain set of conditions are met, then basically we're going to have these certain things happen in the CRM. And those things can be very powerful. When we talk a little bit later about custom functions, you could actually take a bunch of fields, write them from one record to another record. You can automatically send an invoice out. You can create a draft. I mean, it goes on and on and on. The power of these things is pretty dynamic. And it's kind of what sets Zoho CRM apart and what makes it kind of the most powerful, I think, one of the most powerful tools inside of the CRM. So how do you get going with workflows? From your home screen, you're going to go ahead and click on settings. And then once you go to settings, it is going to take you to the main settings screen. And under automation, you will find workflow rules. And once you click on that, you can get going. And Tyler's going to start off here with the if functions and the various triggers.
Yeah, and so, we always want to think about workflows in terms of those if-thens. And so, the two primary components that are going to create the if are going to be the trigger and the conditions. So to kind of get started here, once we're in the workflow rules settings, we'll go ahead and, click the create rule button. First thing it's going to ask here is, what's the module that you want to use, and then what the name of the rule should be. And now it's important to pick the right module. So you might have a workflow where you're planning on maybe something happens in the deal, but you want to send an email to the contact. So you want to pick the module where the actual update or field is going to be edited that will kick off the workflow. So in this case, we're going to look at a workflow for deals. We're going to give it a rule name, and then we'll give it a description. Descriptions end up being pretty important because, someone in the future might want to tweak this workflow or, make some adjustments to it. And this just gives them a little bit of clarity in terms of what the initial intention was when you set this up. So in this case, this workflow is going to fulfill all of our hopes and dreams. And with that, we'll kind of jump in and start setting up our trigger. So, the first selection that you're going to want to make here is, for this trigger. And we're going to choose what type of trigger we want to use, right? So we can use a record action, which is going to be some type of creation or update of a record. We can also use a certain date or date time field to trigger one of these, which we'll jump into in a little more detail. And then there's kind of the last one, kind of the forgotten stepchild, that you can trigger workflows based on score, but oftentimes we don't find much of a use case for that versus, triggering it on a date or particular action. So when we're looking at record actions, we can either have it run on specifically the creation. You can have it run on create or edit. You can have it run specifically on an edit, so it can never run when a record is first created, or you could just run it when you delete a record, which is a little more limited, but you might want to just notify people. So, creation, of course, is just going to be your, only if a record is created with these criteria will it happen. Then you've got create or edit. And if we go back, I'll highlight one little checkbox that you want to be careful with here, which is our repeat this workflow whenever a deal is edited. It's a dangerous checkbox because it's not really clear what it's going to do. But if you have that checked, then any edit to the record while the criteria are met are going to trigger the workflow. So an example of that we'll dive into later is, maybe if you want to run a workflow when you've won a deal, if you have this box checked, then any edit after you've won that deal is going to send that email or create that task. So it's a dangerous one that you oftentimes are going to want to have turned off. Then as we jump into the edit, there's kind of two different options. So you can run a workflow and just say, hey, anytime that any field is edited, go ahead and trigger this. Or you can run it to go on a specific field being modified, which will open up some additional options. So if we go ahead and check the specific fields box, that'll kind of pop open a choice of which field we want to use, and then we can say which option we want it to trigger for. So an example here would be, we want to say when stage of our deal is modified to the value closed won, right? And so maybe we'll make it specifically only for that field being edited. This one's kind of new. They used to have another option called field update. So if you're seeing, that maybe that's missing on here, it's because they've kind of rolled field update into just a type of edit. And then last but not least, you can also run workflows when records are deleted. Oftentimes, this is more for an admin perspective. Maybe you just want to know, hey, anytime a deal gets deleted, that's kind of weird behavior. So just send me an email and let me know, someone just deleted something. Kind of a good little safety check. And kind of moving along to another kind of highly used way to trigger a workflow, we can do them on date time fields. So if we go ahead and select our date, maybe we want to run this workflow based on the closing date, but we don't have to run it just on that date itself. So maybe we want to have a little notification for before that date. So if we click on the on button, we can go ahead and switch it to either like a pre-made option, like 1 week before, or if we pull that option down and choose custom there, we can actually put in a specific number of days, weeks, or months that we want to use to trigger this workflow. So for this first little example, let's say we want to have a workflow run, 3 days before our closing date. We'll just go ahead and enter 3 and then click next. And now we have our trigger. And then last but not least, again, this one we oftentimes don't find a huge use case for, but you can also trigger these on score. So you can say if the score of a certain record is increased, decreased, or just updated in any way. Maybe we want to run a particular workflow. But again, so many different things can update score that oftentimes you want to use a certain record action or a date to trigger these instead, just to be a little bit more specific. So let's say here that we're going to make a workflow, for an upcoming closing date notification, right? So maybe we just want any rep who's got a deal closing in the next couple of days. We just want to go ahead and, send a task or an email to that rep reminding them that, this deal is scheduled to close. So we'll kind of use our one that we set up earlier here. So we'll use closing date. We'll say 3 days before that, and then we'll go ahead and click on next, which will bring us to our conditions. So again, the conditions are kind of like the second half of your if statement, right? So the first half of this, if we kind of read it in English, is, 3 days before the closing date, we want to do this stuff. And we can add a condition to say we only want to do it if certain conditions are met, right? So in this case, we wouldn't want to use all deals. Maybe we want to switch it to, deals matching a certain condition. And then from here, we can basically pull down a list of all the different fields that make up our deal and choose from those to decide what should trigger. So in this case, maybe if we're setting up a notification for 3 days before the closing date, well, if we've already lost a deal, we probably don't need a notification that it's expected to close, right? Your sales reps might get a little bit annoyed being reminded of deals that they lost. So maybe we want to pull down the stage. We can choose from these different kind of options here. And so first, you have things like is or isn't a certain value. For deal stage, you have these extra options for open, won, or lost. Or you could say if a value contains a certain word or certain phrase. And then scrolling down a little bit in that list, there's some really, really useful options for is empty or is not empty. We find ourselves using is not empty really, really, really often. An example of that would be, maybe you want to run a calculation. And so you want to say, once we enter in the margin, right, we want to run a function to do some math. So you could just trigger that by saying, regardless of whatever value is put in, if it's not empty, then we'll use that condition. In this case, we'll go ahead and say that, we want to run this as long as the stage is not certain values. And we'll use the closed lost and closed lost to competition, as well as closed won, just to basically remove them from this reminder that the closing date is coming up. Then once we click next, it'll kind of save that little criteria there, and we can go ahead and add our action. Now, Brett's going to kind of cover all of these in detail later, so I'll kind of skip back past that a little and just say that we're going to add a task to this for a notification that we have our closing date coming up. And so this right here is kind of like the most basic way that you could set up a workflow, right? So we just have, one trigger, we have one little criteria, and then we set up an action that happens as long as that criteria is met. Let's say we want to get just a little bit more fancy with this. So let's say that, maybe if a deal is too small, right? Not just a big enough deal, maybe we don't need these kinds of reminders, right? So we can actually go ahead and add another condition here and say that the amount has to be greater than $50,000 in order for this notification to go out. Now, one little important thing kind of between number 1 and number 2 is we have that selection for and, right? And in this case, we want both of these things to be true in order for this to trigger. But if you click that, it'll change it over to or, which will mean if either of these two options are true, then we'll go ahead and run the workflow. And so, from there, if we go ahead and save that, now we have a little bit more of a specific workflow looking at, the amount as well as the stage to decide if we need a reminder or a notification about this deal. But if we take it even one level further, maybe we want to add a little bit of logic here. So maybe we change that value and say, if the amount is under 50,000, we'll do our standard upcoming deal notification. But over on the left, we can add another condition and say, if the amount is greater than 50,000, maybe we want to have another different kind of task saying that we have an upcoming big deal that's going to close. So if we go ahead and add that in, we basically now have a decision that the workflow is looking at to say, based on the amount and the stage, let's key off the right task. So, before we go further, I kind of want to just read this in English, right? Because really you want to think these things through in, just plain English before you start to build them. So if we kind of read this workflow, it basically reads as 3 days before the closing date, if the stage is not already closed and the amount is less than 50,000, we'll create our standard task. But if we're 3 days before the closing date and stage isn't closed, but the amount is greater than 50,000, then we'll create our big deal task. So oftentimes what we recommend if you want to start building these out on your own is just kind of write them out. Don't start by getting in here and trying to build the workflows. Kind of map it out with a flow chart or kind of just write out some thoughts of these if-then statements that you want to implement, and then work from something that's kind of natural, like the written word, and try to translate it into the logic that the system is going to need. Because it's very easy to kind of start chasing your tail if we haven't really written out what the use case is that we need for the workflow. And so, another little example here of a workflow that you may want, let's say we want to have a field update workflow that we want to run anytime that the stage is updated to closed won, and it's a new business deal, right? So it's not a renewal or repeat business. Maybe we only want to run this if it's a new business deal. And so again, in plain English, this workflow reads as, if the stage is modified to closed won and the type is new business, then we'll go ahead and start triggering some actions. And with that, I'll kind of pass it to Brett, and you can walk through exactly what those actions are and how you would go about setting them up.
Thank you, Tyler. All right, so let's talk about the various actions here. So we're going to start with field updates. So again, we're just picking up where Tyler left off. We have got a deal that is closed won and it is new business. So you basically, at this point, you've got instant actions and scheduled actions. We're really only going to talk about instant actions today. Scheduled actions are identical, except you schedule them. You'll say it's going to do it in 3 hours, do it in 5 days, do it in a week. You set the time, and then the same actions happen. Instant actions are one that as soon as this condition is met inside the record, then these actions are going to fire off. So we'll start with the first one, which is field update. And a field update is just exactly what it says. So one of the biggest uses, if you're thinking about this, is, okay, I just won some new business. So what field might I want to update? And when you look here, you have a choice. You've got the main module, and then the modules underneath that are available to you. So in this case, you've got accounts, campaigns, and contacts that are associated with this deal. So Oftentimes you've got an account and maybe it is marked as a prospect. So now that the deal is closed won, it's no longer a prospect. It is in fact a client or a customer. So let's go ahead and basically say, let's choose accounts and we're going to give it a name. We're going to change the account from a prospect to a customer in the accounts module, and the account type is now going to be equal to customer. Go ahead and save and associate, and now you will see under the instant actions, you've got field updates, change account from prospect to customer. So just a very simple action, but something that can keep your CRM very, very clean. Additionally for that, you might want to say, well, let's do the same thing with any of the contacts that are associated with this record. So let's change the contact from a prospect to a customer. So now we're going to go into the contacts module and we're going to change the type of the contact that is associated with this deal to customer. Oftentimes, maybe you'll want to change the entire everybody that's associated with that particular company to a customer now. You can't do that through here. You can only basically take the people that are associated with the deal, but you can do that through a script. And Tyler will talk about that a little bit later on, how that would work. And so now if we look at our instant actions, we've got 2 field updates on this new business, change account uh, to a customer and change the contact to a customer. So now let's move down the list here and let's talk a little bit about tags. So tags are inside of basically leads, contacts, accounts, deals. You can associate tags. This is something Zoho added several years ago, and they're powerful. You don't have to create a special custom field. You don't have to have a drop down. You don't have a multi-select pick list. You can just quickly throw a tag up. Tags can get messy. Oftentimes, I think you might want to use tags for extremely temporary kind of things. So in this case, let's say we do want to write a tag to this deal, and you've got a choice. You can add tags or remove tags from a particular, from any record that you're in when you're doing this. So let's start with adding tags. So I'm going to add a tag here which says awaiting payment. So this is kind of maybe a minor thing, but you could easily filter people. The deal's been closed, it's won, but they haven't paid you yet. And until they pay you, maybe other things are going to happen. So you also can, at this point, say overwrite all the other existing tags there, but maybe you've got other tags. So you've got a choice. If you click that override existing tags, then the only tag associated with the account will be awaiting payment. But if you don't, then this is just going to add this as yet another tag to that record. And once you go ahead and save it, you can see we now have a tag called awaiting payment. By the same token, you can remove tags. So maybe you had a tag that was hot prospect. So you're doing those kind of things and tagging your accounts, whether they're hot, they're cold, all of the deals that you're working through. Well, we really don't need that tag associated with this record anymore because they went from hot prospect to closed business. So you can go ahead and remove that. So just a couple of examples of what you can do with tags. So as you can see now, we've got our field updates. We're adding a tag. We're taking a tag off. And the next action you can take is the notify action. Now, before we jump into notify, I want to point out that one of the most powerful things you can do with notify is you actually can notify people inside Zoho Click. And if you're unfamiliar with Zoho Click, it is basically Zoho's version of Slack. It is extremely good, very powerful. Most clients that we work with adopt it over a period of time, and the integrations are very, very nice with other Zoho products. So one of the things you'll want to do right out of the gate is you're going to want to go back into your settings, go to the marketplace, click on Zoho, and you're going to want to go ahead and click the set up Zoho Click integration with the CRM. Now you really have to do nothing. You click that button and the next thing you see is do you want to enable this? You enable it and you're done. And now when you're in workflows under notify, you'll see via email and via click. If you don't have this integration set up, you'll know it relatively easily because all you're going to see is notify via email. Click won't be there. So kind of important to turn that on, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit as well.
Yeah, and especially when
So
you get into these types of internal notifications, working to kind of break them out of email can be a really, really useful thing for your team so that they can keep email specifically for actual client interaction, right? And not kind of have their inbox clogged up by, notifications or reminders through the CRM.
yeah, and it's so targeted too. You can send it to a channel, you can send it to an individual. There's just so much you can do with Click. It powerful across the board. So let's talk about Notify. So Maybe you have someone who's not in your organization and this deal has just closed. Maybe you use an outside bookkeeper. So you want to create an email notification. So when you can create a brand new one. And here, what I've done, I've got one called invoice notification. And I'm going ahead and you can actually add any recipient inside the company. So you can click in here and you can add it to a group. You can add it to individual recipients. You can have it go that way. But you also can have outside recipients. So here we're going to send it to accounting at Dewey, Cheatham and Howe. And off it's going to go to them. And you're going to have this template, which is send invoice to accounting. So basically, it's a notification to the accounting firm that, guess what? We closed this. Please go ahead and issue an invoice and send it out to this customer. And since it's just a standard template that's inside the CRM, you can insert all the fields you want. So you can actually create a template that puts in the customer name, the amount of the invoice, the due date, the terms, all of that. If it was sitting in the deal, can easily be pulled into an email and be sent out to this external source. And then once you do that, you go ahead and save and associate. And now we've got a email notification going out to someone in your organization, informing them of an action they need to take. In this case, send an invoice. We've closed new business. And then, of course, we have click. Well, maybe you want to notify your entire team. We have a new client. So if you do a click notification, you'll see that little part in blue there where it says deals name. That's actually going to insert whatever you have named that actual opportunity or deal. So we have a new client, Zenatta Consulting, whatever the name may be, it'll be there so people know they have it. It also makes it live in a link so they actually can click on that and directly it'll take them to that record directly in the CRM as well. And you also have a choice here. You can send it to individuals, you can send it to channels. So in this case, I've said, let's go ahead and send it to a channel. And that channel is going to be the announcements channel. So letting everybody in the organization know, hey, guess what? We have a new client. Here's their name. You can go ahead and click on this link and read all about them inside the CRM. So a quick way to go ahead and get those announcements out.
Mm-hmm.
And as Tyler was saying, one that completely declutters their inboxes.
Yeah, and a big way that gets used too is like, let's say that once you win a deal, you might have a deployment team, right, that needs to now get started on building a project or building a scope of work. And that deployment team might change over time. So you don't want to have an email where you have to say it goes to these 5 people and then 1 leaves. So now you go to these 4 and then 2 joins. Now you go to these 6. If you're just notifying a specific channel, then anyone who's a part of that channel will always be notified by this without you having to go ahead and update these workflows all the time to keep the user list accurate.
Yeah. And you can stack these as well to just have as many different notifications as you want. It's rather nice. What is it? 5 per action?
5
Is that the current?
per workflow. Yeah.
5 per workflow. And if you run out, then you maybe just fire off another condition or you move them to a scheduled action that will happen in an hour. There's a lot of little workarounds around that if you need to stack those up. Okay, so now we have kind of moved through field updates, tags, email notification, click notification, and one of the big one that a lot of people use is just overall tasking. So when we look at the tasks, again, you're going to add another action. We're going to call it a task, and it's going to give you a choice. If you've created tasks internally inside of workflows before, it's actually going to give you a choice just to choose those, and those will always be available to you. This is particularly helpful if you're building out, like in real estate, we see this a lot where it's something like, notify the appraiser that the house needs to be appraised. Well, that exact same task might live in 10 different workflows that they need to do that. So you don't need to create a new task every time. You can just choose one of the existing ones that's there. But in this case, I'm going to create a new task. And it's going to be pretty simple, which is set up the client in the customer portal. So we want to do that. We're going to have it happen immediately. I want this task to fire off again as soon as this deal is set to closed won. And then you can actually set the status of this task. You can set as priority and you can assign it to a user. It's important to note if you don't assign it, then it's going to be assigned to the record owner. So oftentimes we're looking at companies and that record owner, particularly in this, we're talking about a deal or an opportunity. That's the sales guy. And maybe you want these tasks just to be assigned to them. You don't actually need to you don't need to denote who it's going to go to at that point in time. If you want it to go to somebody else though, you can choose that person and go ahead and put them in as well. And then you can also choose whether or not you want to notify the person. And this will be an email notification that's going to go out to them, or you can actually set up a reminder as well. And then then you have the choice of just doing it as a little pop-up that's going to happen in the CRM, or alert them as well. And you can do both, and you can set the time and date as to when that is going to happen. And then, of course, as in any task, you can give it a description and pop in whatever you want there. And this is, hey, please set them up in the portal and send out an invite. Maybe you would even want that invite to be a separate task. Then once you go, oh, another important thing here, you can also have merge fields in any of these tasks that you set up. So you can get pretty granular here. Set up, instead of saying client, you could have inserted the client name. All of these kind of things you can kind of put in to give a little more context to whatever this task is going to say. And then save and associate. And now we have got a task added to our instant actions here. Now, I want to digress a little bit because we get asked this oftentimes, which are, how do you do task dependencies? In other words, if I finished this task, I want another task to fire off. You can't do it in the same workflow. What you need to do is you actually need to create another workflow rule, not associated with deals. I'll associate it with tasks and call it task dependencies. And then you can then go ahead and create a brand new, go through everything that Tyler talked about. And so in this case, I'm going to say on a record action, when the record is edited and the status is modified to completed, and the subject of that task is set up client and customer portal. You basically want to copy and paste whatever the name of the task is that you're auto creating. Once you do that, you kind of get the entire thing set up. Then you'll be able to go ahead and add a new task. So if the subject is there, if it's set to close, set up client and customer portal, the value is completed, then I want to create a new task, which is schedule onboarding call with client. So these task dependencies actually live in a kind of a completely separate module. So if you can't really internally in the last big workflow we're doing, you can't say, hey, if I complete this task, I want to do something else. You can't really get that to work because that is associated. It's only looking at the deals module. It's not going to look at tasks. But this is one little workaround that kind of helps you accomplish that if you're looking to set up some task dependencies.
Yeah, and one little nice thing about these task dependencies as well is, when we have that original workflow that happens in the deal and it creates the first task to set up client and customer portal, well, that setup client task is going to be associated to the related contact, and it'll be associated to that deal. And when you come in here and use a task dependency like this, the task that will be generated here to schedule onboarding call with client will be associated to the same records as the previous task. So Zoho actually kind of has a little bit of logic that's kind of running behind the scenes where it knows that this previous task was associated to your deal with Zenatta. So then the follow-up task will also be associated to that same deal. Just becomes powerful because you might have a long string of these throughout a customer lifecycle, and you don't want to have to go in and manually, associate them to a deal. But luckily the CRM is kind of smart enough to handle that for you.
All right. And with that, Tyler, let's talk about creating a record.
Yes, this is kind of a new action that Zoho released not too long ago, I think within the past 6 months or so. And you're basically able to create any record on a trigger here. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to create a renewal deal. So let's say that we're selling a deal that has a contract life of 1 year. So we want to say, hey, if we ever sell a new client, we want to automatically just tee up a deal for 1 year in the future to sell their renewal. So we'll go ahead and choose that we want to go ahead to make a deal. Inside of any of these fields, we can go ahead and hit pound to pull down some fields from that deal. So maybe in this case, we want to pull in, the deal name and then say, deal name dash renewal. For the accounts, you can do that same exact thing. So I can pull in and say, whichever account this previous deal was related to, go ahead and relate this new deal to that same exact account. Then we can actually say, what should the new closing date of this deal be? So in this case, if we're on a 1 year term, maybe we want to just assume that the next closing date is going to be about 1 year in the future. So we'll estimate that out to be, 1 year out. Next, again, we can kind of decide specifically what the stage should be. So in this case, maybe if we've already sold them in the past, we can kind of skip through the prospecting and the needs analysis and just go straight to the negotiation and review. And then last but not least here down at the bottom, we can determine who the deal owner will be. You can either choose, a user in the organization. You could choose, whoever created this deal. In this case, we think it makes the most sense to assign it to the deal owner. Really, the only times that you wouldn't want to do that is if you're worried maybe you might have some turnover and you don't want things assigned to someone who might not be with the company within a year. But oftentimes you just want to default it to that owner so that, in 11 months, when we start getting reminders that we want to re-engage with this person, it's coming from that same, salesperson that previously sold them the deal. So it's kind of a new one where, you used to have to use a function anytime you wanted to create another record. And oftentimes you still might, but in those cases where you have something kind of simple, like just, tee me up a deal in 1 year, you can go ahead and use that create record. Now we're going to talk through some of the advanced actions that you can run within the workflows as well. These are a little bit more developer focused or integration focused, but I'll kind of roll up some of the key actions that these can do at the tail end of each of these sections. So first we'll jump into webhooks. And for the non-developers listening, a webhook is really just a simple way to send some data somewhere outside of Zoho. Right. So if you just want to, common use cases might be sending an automated text or sending some data to your fulfillment system, right? And oftentimes you can get the job done with a webhook. So kind of running down the page here, first we'll go ahead and give it a name. Then we'll give it a URL. Again, that's going to be something determined by the developers. In this case, maybe we're integrating this with our custom app. So we're going to, send the data to customapp.io. We'll go ahead and define some of the parameters that we want to send out. So in this case, we're going to call something deal name, and then we're going to choose to pull in, whatever the name of this deal was and call that deal name as we send out the data. So just as kind of a little simple example there, this would just be an easy way to post out some data to some third-party system, notifying it that a particular deal has been won. Again, something that, you're probably going to work with some developers on, but definitely a useful way to kind of quickly and easily format some data to be sent out of Zoho. So really common use cases of this is when you need to send data to any third-party system. You're not going to need to use a webhook to do really anything within the CRM. So any type of CRM to CRM action, you can just skip right past webhooks. It's really more for integrations. Really common use cases of this are things like automated texting. Pretty much every automated texting platform that we have touched, from ClickSend to Twilio to JustCall, RingCentral SMS, they all work basically the same, and they're all just with webhooks, right? You send a phone number and a message to a specific URL, and then a text goes out. Other ones will be things like fulfillment systems. Maybe if you're logging certain product information in a deal and you win that, and you just want to say, hey, this customer, this is our expected shipment date, this is the product, and take it from there in that other system. And then last but not least, you might want to send some data to something like an accounting system. So maybe you want to say, we want to invoice this on this date for this amount to this customer. So they're kind of just in general ways to quickly and easily put together a structured set of data and send it somewhere outside of Zoho. The other type of more advanced action here that we at Zenatta use all the time are functions. And basically, I won't dig into any code here, but really any of the other actions that we've talked about, from sending emails to creating tasks to updating fields, all of those and more can be done with functions. Basically, any action that a user can take in the CRM can be automated via a function. So, in this case, what Brett had talked about earlier is, when you win that deal, I can go ahead and update the directly related account, and I can make that customer, and I can update the directly related contact and call that a customer. But let's say that we had 4 or 5 contacts underneath that account, and maybe not all 5 of those are directly associated to a deal, but we want to actually update all of them to be customer, right? Not just the ones that are directly in play with this deal. And for use cases like that, that's kind of where you need to, put together a little function. So really, in essence, if we read this function in English, it's really just saying, look at the deal record, look at whichever account is related to that, read through the list of contacts that are related to that account. And then for each of those contacts, we'll go ahead and update their type to customer, right? And so, a lot of these functions, if you kind of get your feet wet just a little bit with them, you can kind of get through them and do some really powerful things that, just reduce manual work that you'd have to go through and do, kind of one by one, clicking through each of those contacts.
Yeah, I think it is the most powerful part of, I think, Zoho CRM, Zoho in general. To take this to the next level, we have a function we use internally that we wrote where oftentimes a customer client will come to us and maybe they purchased 20 hours of development with us and they said, oh man, this was great, but I want to do another 10 hours so we can get this done or that done. And we've got other projects we want to do. We have a custom function not associated with a workflow, but associated with a button. And you basically push the button and maybe the person had 2 hours left on that the first block of 20 hours. It will close out that entire deal, create a new deal, add the 2 out, subtract the 2 hours, zero out the first deal, add the 2 hours to the next deal, completely clean up, create an invoice in draft mode ready to go out. I mean, there's just so much you can do that is just one click of a button that just can be automated, that is so time saving. I mean, recently, I think you did one that contracts were sent out, signatures written back to the deal, everything all occurring basically with a click of a button. And that's kind of the power of the custom functions, and especially with the Deluge scripting. So what are some key use cases, Tyler?
Yeah, so a lot of key use cases for this. Again, I'll highlight anything that we talked about before, literally any of those other actions, adding tags, sending emails, creating tasks. You can do all of those with functions. Other kind of things that are specific to functions are things like updating what we call child records. A common term in databasing is kind of like a parent and a child, right? And so if you have an account and you have a deal, right, that account is the parent and the deal is the child, because you could have multiple deals all within one account. And with a field update, you can go from child to parent. But with a field update, you can't go from parent to all of the related child records. So a common use case of that we bump into is, maybe when a deal gets updated to closed lost, you might have 5 or 6 open tasks related to that deal, right? And with a standard workflow, there would be no way to say, when I lose a deal, go ahead and just close out all those tasks, right? Save the sales rep from having to click closed on 6 or 7 different tasks, right? And so with a function, you can actually teach it to read that related list of tasks and go ahead and update all of them to closed. Another really common use case of Deluge is running calculations. So you can actually do all the math inside of Deluge. So maybe when a deal is won, you want to look at, the deal amount, the cost to fulfill it, who it was that sold it, and run some logic to figure out the commission that's due, right? Maybe you have different reps at different rates or different products at different rates. And you can actually just read all of that information, put together a big long math statement, and then run it and update a record to calculate what the commission is due. Another common one might be something like profit margin, right? If you know that a deal was sold for 20,000 and it's got these, 5 or 6 products related to it, let's go and look at all those products, figure out what the cost is of all those products, and then sum that and subtract it from whatever our sold amount is to get our profit on that deal. Last but not least, and definitely not least, I should say, are integration actions within Zoho. So one little bit of special sauce kind of across the Zoho platform is that Deluge is universal. Deluge is in Zoho Books. Deluge is in Zoho Sign. It's in CRM. It's in Desk. Every single application is all empowered by Deluge. And so from the CRM, we can actually go ahead and write functions that do actions in other Zoho apps, right? So things like creating an invoice inside of Zoho Books, or maybe at a certain point in the process, you just know you want to send a Zoho Sign document for signature, right? And so you create your template in Zoho Sign, you write a quick function, and now when you click the contract sent stage, the contract just goes out, right? And you don't have to go through the process of clicking through and sending it out manually. So really there's very little that you can't do with a function. Oftentimes you can get most of the way there with all of the other actions like field updates and tasks and things like that. And really it's when you start to bump into the walls, right, that you can't quite get done with those mechanisms, or where you want to start looking at custom functions to get the job done.
All right, that brings us to our Q&A, and we'll kind of follow up. So Sean asked, do we have any recommendations on Deluge learning and training specific to Zoho? There are two that are out there that I think we widely use. So there's a gentleman by the name of Jeremy Nagel, and he's got a course called Deluge on a Luge, and it's over at Udemy. So if you go to udemy.com, I think, you know, the first course you can buy there, you can get it for $12. That's not bad. And then our friend Peter Fuller, he's got the Workflow Academy. If you do to workflowacademy.com, and he actually has a very good course on Deluge as well. I think we like that one a lot recently. I think they both are very good, but the Workflow Academy has a more updated one, and it's a pretty nice course.
Yeah.
Any other resources?
Yeah, I'd say one other resource that that really you can't undersell how important it is just trying to do it, Googling it, right? I mean, before I was a Zoho consultant, you know, I worked just at a company that used Zoho, and really to figure out how certain functions would work, I would just go to Google, right? So something like, you know, when you win a deal, updating all of the contacts related to that account to customer, like I would basically take that, type it into Google, right? And you'll find forum posts where Zoho has kind of like written code for people, or people have worked together to figure these things out. Kind of the last resource as well is if you chat Zoho through your CRM, they'll help you write code as well. They're very responsive and will screen share with you and kind of help you put some of these things together. Yeah, there's really no substitute for just getting in there and trying it. It's really the best way to learn. But yeah, courses like Workflow Academy and then Deluge on a Luge will kind of skip you past some of the initial steps in the learning process.
All right. So Tyler, Stephen asks, can you create a workflow that recurs every 90 days based on a date field? I know we can, we've done it, but there's some tricks to it.
Yeah. So with the tasks that are date based, you can have them recur either daily, monthly, or yearly by default. If you want to have a kind of custom cadence, you actually do need a function, and there's a trick to it. Basically, what you do, let's say you have your date field that's called, you know, like last client contact date, and you know, every time that date comes up, you could go ahead and assign a task on that date and then run a function that would update that date to 90 days in the future. So you kind of build a little loop with a function that basically every time that date gets reached again, the function runs and moves it another.
Yep. Well, we made it to days. You want to finish that? You hung up there the last part, but I think you got it.
Got it.
It was all good. All right. Do we have any other question? I know you answered 4. Anything we might want to discuss here?
Yeah, so kind of a little clarification for, you know, field updates and edits. You know, basically I mentioned that because they used to be a separate trigger for like an edit to a record or an edit to a specific field. But for clarity, Zoho kind of rolled those together to just be a type of edit rather than calling it a field update. It was kind of just for clarity and to make sure that the triggers were going off correctly, you know, without any hitches.
All right. Anything else?
And we had one other question as well, kind of related to blueprints. You know, so blueprints are in essence like a structured way to move through a pick list. So you might have a blueprint for each kind of like stage in a deal. You know, and the question was, can you use a field update to update where you are at in the blueprint? You cannot. So once you have a certain field in a blueprint, a field update or even a function can no longer move it. One important thing to note if you are playing with blueprints, and as an aside, those could be an entire own webinar of themselves. There's a lot you can do there. But with blueprints, any of these actions that we talked about today, you can run in any transition in a blueprint that you're using. We did have one additional question here that just came in. Do you have a preference between creating a custom app in Creator and adding it as a web tab to the CRM, or just creating a custom module within the CRM with some advantages and disadvantages? Really good question. We actually go back and forth on this all the time of like where the cutoff is. I would say, if at all possible, make it a custom module in the CRM. It's just going to make your life easier. You're only going to need to learn one user interface. You're only going to have to teach people one user interface. Really, the decision on when you want to break it to creator is if you can't get the look and feel that you need with a CRM module. Another one might be if you have some really complicated layout rules for the module. So, outside of workflows, there are things called layout rules that will, show and hide fields on a page based on, a different field option. You can only get so far with those in the CRM, but over in Creator, the layout rules are actually built in Deluge, so you can really make them do whatever you want. The last reason that might break you out into needing to do something in Creator is if not everyone who's going to interact with it has a license. So like, let's say that, you're a 20-person company and you're on Zoho 1, and you're paying $35 per month for those users. Well, anyone who's going to interact with that CRM record is going to need a user license. So let's say you had a bunch of 1099 employees, or you wanted to have customers accessing this data. Then if you have it in Creator, you can spin up a little portal and permission people for a lot cheaper to be able to access and work with that data.
So I guess really there is a fourth one too, which is there are some things you can do in Creator you just can't do in the CRM.
And yeah, there's subforms. The subforms in Creator are much better than subforms in CRM. So if you need to do like really complicated stuff with subforms, you might want to break it out that way. But it really is pros and cons. I would say what you always want to do is try to build it in the CRM first. And then if you can't, then it's time to kind of look at Creator and, do things that way.
All right. Thank you, everybody. That's good. We got some announcements here. We did have one more question when this will show up on YouTube, and that it will show up on YouTube tonight, probably in the next 4 or 5 hours. You'll see it there as well. All right, so some announcements. We've got an April webinar coming up here. So our Zoho People webinar, Best Practices, is going to be Tuesday, April 20th at 10 a.m. That's our normal April webinar. This is kind of our bonus April webinar. Additionally, it's not on here, but if you don't know, we do the CRM Zen Show live every Friday. 9:30 Pacific time is when we go live. Usually start at around 9:45. And not this Friday, but on the 16th of April, we're going to have a very special guest. So Raju Vignesa is going to be here. He's the chief evangelist at Zoho. He's actually going to sit in on the whole show, go through all the news with us, but we're also going to spend a little bit of time talking about the first 25 years of Zoho. So that's we're really looking forward to that, and I think that is going to be a nice event. All righty. And with that, if you like to reach us, you can reach us both at zenatta.com and crmzen.com. You can just send emails to info at either one of those addresses, or go to those websites and there's forms you can fill out to get in touch with us.
And if you'd like, feel free to go ahead and follow us on your favorite social media platform, and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app if you want to stay in the loop with the CRM Zen Show. And of course, all of our webinars, YouTube contents, and podcasts all get posted out to our YouTube channel over at youtube.com/Zenatta. So feel free to jump over there and give us a subscribe if you want to stay in the loop.
And that's it, everybody. Until next time, keep going on with Zoho. We'll see you soon.